Hello and welcome to the Mac Power Users. My name is David Sparks, and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Stephen Hackett. How are you, Stephen?
Oh, good, David. How are you?
Good. I know you are just returning from Cupertino as we record this. The dust is settling on the WWDC announcements, and we thought we would dig in deep on that today. But first, Stephen, how was your trip?
It was great. It was short. I was only in California Sunday through Wednesday. So brief trip this time. We're recording this on Thursday. I just got back last night. But it's good. Good to see folks. Good to see what Apple's up to. You know, it's not the same as it was pre-COVID, but it's coming into its own again.
Yeah. And I'm glad you were kind of in town when it happened. It was a momentous year for Apple, as we're going to be discussing.
Yeah.
Before we get there, though, today on More Power Users, Stephen and I are going to be talking about beta strategies as to where do you install these betas if you're interested in going down that road. We're going to do a show in the future about our thoughts on the betas of the software as we get into it deeper. But we thought maybe we talk about where you install it and where you don't. So that'll be More Powers today, the ad-free extended version of the show. You can learn more about that at relay.fm/MPU.
Yeah. It's a great time to be a member.
So we are not going to follow Apple's order. We
No.
decided because we're the Mac Power Users. We're going to start with Mac OS Sequoia. I like the name, by the way, Sequoia.
I like the name too. It's a great name. You know, they have lots of good names to choose from in California, and I think this is a winner.
It's got all the vowels and two consonants.
It is tricky to spell. You got to really pay attention.
Yeah, but once you learn it, it's cool.
Yep.
And I've been there several times. It's gorgeous. I love those big redwood trees. So it's it has fond memories for me. So I'm glad that they picked Sequoia. So Either way, that is the new name this year. I don't know why we even talk about it. I mean, it's hard to, like, what was the name 3 years ago? Do you even remember?
No, it's hard to keep up with the California names for me.
Yeah. But either way, it's a nice name, and Craig gets to do his usual jokes about saying that the marketing team is high, the crack marketing team, and then we move on. Do you want to talk about real quickly that intro with them jumping out of the airplane?
It's pretty good. You know, they've gotten kind of goofier and funnier over the years, and I thought it was fun, but it did remind me, I will say, of the Google Glass introduction where they jumped and live streamed video onto the roof of the Moscone Center. Had those vibes a little bit.
My favorite part was Phil Schiller, where he says, "I'm getting too old for this," and I'm sure we've got listeners that remember when Phil jumped off a platform to prove that the Wi-Fi worked, the wireless Wi-Fi worked on the Mac. I feel like that was his reference. Is it just me?
I like to think so.
Yeah. So that now they're jumping out, and it was fun, and it was just long enough. They didn't drag it out. It was cute, fun intro, and then they just got on with it. In fact, that whole keynote I felt was very fast paced.
It was. It's so hard to keep notes, and in the old times when they had, like a live presenter and a live audience, there were like applause breaks, right? Or, and they kind of knew when they were going to be, but the video just keeps going without you, and you gotta keep up.
Yeah. All right. So back to macOS Sequoia. Several new features. One thing to point out, I think just about every new feature that got introduced was on every platform, except for Vision OS didn't get a lot of the updates, but boy, I feel like we're in this era where it's just the presumption that when Apple adds a new feature, that you're going to get it on all platforms. And that's kind of a nice place to be, right?
It is. It's really nice that everything is getting everything kind of all at once, but it does make it hard to talk about. And, we've spoken before, like, does it still make sense that they do these keynotes OS by OS as opposed by feature, but they haven't changed that. I mean, really, I can only think of a handful of things that are Mac specific as opposed to a bunch of other stuff that got introduced in the Mac section of the keynote, but that we saw everywhere else too.
So for lack of clear priority. Let's just start with messages.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of new messages this year. I think the biggest thing that most people will appreciate is that you can now the tap back feature, the thumbs up, thumbs down, haha. I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. You can now use emoji in there just like you can in Slack or Discord or WhatsApp or basically every other messaging app out there.
Yeah, yeah. Nice feature. And they also made reference that you can do stickers there. I haven't
Yeah.
got around to trying that yet, but I would definitely appreciate if I could add some of my custom stickers into that mix. And that works on everything. Another messages improvement, and I'm sorry if I'm mixing these up, but the send later thing I think is a nice touch too.
I do
I've
too.
already been using that. I think it's really great because sometimes you don't want to send a message to somebody at 11 o'clock at night, so just schedule it for tomorrow morning.
Yep. No, I use that feature in Slack all the time, and it's really nice
Yeah,
to have it in messages.
yeah. When I had clients, I always dreaded when they would text me at like 5 p.m. because then you're going to be in this like text thread for the next hour and you just want to finish your day. But you also know now that you've seen it, you're going to forget to look at it in the morning. So this solves that, right? Just write a reply, send it tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good. Another feature that is everywhere is hiking support in Apple Maps, where you can set up a route. And I've played with this on iOS. It is not as full featured as more like focused apps like Pedometer Plus Plus that I work on, or All Trails, or some others. But it's similar enough, I think, of people who are looking for that, will be excited to find it in Maps. Basically, you set a start point, and then you can drop your waypoints, or you can kind of draw it roughly, and it will kind of figure out the best path for you. It will close the path, it'll reverse it, and that's everywhere. I think they showed it in the Mac section in particular, like in the planning mode, or like if you're planning to go out, you could do that at Maps on your Mac. I know I do that pretty often. If I'm looking for something before I leave, I'll actually just use Maps, at my desk and like look up the hours or bookmark it or something so it's safe for later. And that's everywhere as well.
Stephen, can we take a quick sidebar on Sherlocking? Can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
Okay, so the etymology of Sherlocking. There was an app on on the on the Mac years ago. Was it Watson
It was.
or yeah, Watson? And it was a great little search app, right? And then Apple copied the app. I mean, they just copied the app, and they called it Sherlock. And it was clearly just Apple saying this is a great feature. We're just going to include it in the operating system. But they really copied Watson.
Yeah.
And so the verb Sherlock was born,
Mm-hmm.
and now people celebrate it every year to talk about how all these apps get Sherlocked. And I feel like it is way overused. I mean, if you look at the original example, it was truly a feature copy that Apple did. But when you were talking earlier about this new Maps feature and how it's good, but it doesn't really compare to the more advanced versions of this that third-party app developers are making. Everybody wants to call that a Sherlock. I don't think it's really a Sherlock. I think it's just, you saw the same thing with passwords, which we'll get to eventually. It's like they're making a native app that does a thing or adding a feature that does a thing. But Apple's never going to put the wood behind the arrow that an independent developer does. It's just, and I just don't think it's Sherlocking. Am I being pedantic here?
I think maybe it comes in shades, right? Or like maybe one of your features is copied to a certain degree or not. But the history is, obviously interesting, and the word means a lot to people in the community. So I view it as a scale.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like people are very quick to jump the gun on this stuff. And, Apple gets like 60% of the way there. And that's fine because for 90% of the people, probably 60% of the way is enough.
Mm-hmm.
But there are better apps for a lot of stuff. I don't know. Just a little sidebar there.
I do want to talk about something that we have talked about at length on the show, and that's window management. And,
Yeah.
every few years, Apple adds something new to window management on the Mac. And they kind of did the thing that a lot of us wanted. They're basically doing it the way Windows does it, where you can have Windows go into a tile like grid. They've put this behind the green, it used to be the maximize button. Now it's like do everything else with the window you want button.
Yeah.
And I think there's some keyboard shortcuts there as well. And again, I brought this up now because you just mentioned Sherlocking. Yeah, this does probably put the squeeze on some third-party apps that do window management, but Apple's never going to go deeper than they did right now. And so if you want something that really gives you fine-grained control, there will still be those tools out there for you. And there's lots of them. We covered them, I don't know, like a year ago or something on the show. So for most people, this will be their first introduction to tiled window management. Notably, not on the iPad, I just want to say, where I think this would be pretty sweet, actually. The iPad, there's no changes in terms of multitasking there, multi-windowing, but new tile layouts on macOS.
Yeah. I mean, this stands out because the prior implementation by Apple was so bad.
Yeah.
The idea that you have to put them into full screen mode and then half screen mode. It's like, yuck. And I think this will be better.
I think so too. I think people will dig this. And, like Windows, the operating system Windows has kind of been the gold standard, at least in my mind, for this being built in. And it looks very similar. And I'm glad they're doing it. I use Better Snap Tool, and I probably still will because I actually have it set up for like 1/3 width, 2/3 widths. I've got some custom stuff in there, but for most people who have never done anything like this will be awesome. And it'll be their first experience with it. And then they do want more. Now they know about it. And now they can go out to the Mac App Store or to the web and find something like Moom or Better Snap Tool or, one of the 100 other ones that we've covered.
Yeah, I'm actually going to look at this seriously as a candidate to replace Moom. Although, like you, I do a bunch of custom stuff with Moom that I'm sure I won't get. But the question is, will the convenience of a built-in tool be enough to satisfy me?
Yeah.
I'll tell you another feature they announced as a screencaster that I'm excited about is this continuity iPhone mirroring. So yeah, the way it works is, and it's more than just mirroring. Like there are apps right now. My favorite one currently, if you're interested, is Bezel. But you have to have your iPhone plugged in order for it to work, but it puts your iPhone on your screen. But this does way more than this. This allows you to remotely control your iPhone from your screen. And this had to be like somebody at Apple said, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could just go interact with my phone that's in the other room right here on my screen? And they built it.
Yeah. At the talk show, Craig Federighi mentioned that this is pretty awesome if you use your phone as a continuity camera. Like, oh, my phone's up above my display, but I need something off of it. You can just use this. And the way that this works, this is a new application in Sequoia. In beta 1, we're going to talk about the betas next week, but in beta 1, it seems to be turned off. But it's like a standalone app, so you can kind of go into it when you need it. And I think it's awesome. I want more of this. Why can't I bring my phone up on my iPad or my iPad up in my Vision Pro? Like, I hope this is the beginning of a longer journey.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, when they announced it, kept waiting for them to say, oh, and you can do your iPad too. I mean, it seemed like such a natural, and it never came. So a couple details about it. It runs audio through your Mac. So, they just did it right. So if you get, like, you want to play a podcast from your iPhone podcast player, it plays through your Mac when you're in this standby continuity mode. And the coolest thing at the end was where you could drag and drop content. Like you could take a file and drop it onto the iPhone from your Mac and it'll install the file. I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
That's why it really goes above and beyond the existing tools out there for this kind of thing. Super curious to see how it works, once they get it into the betas.
Yeah. And your phone stays locked, right? So if you're like zipping around on your phone and you left it on your nightstand, your partner is not going to see what you're doing on your phone, right? It stays locked. It even is compatible with standby mode, which I know you and I are both big fans of. Your phone will stay in standby mode, and then you can be using it with your Mac. Super cool, super well thought through. And it seems like from what they showed us, it's going to be really polished from day one.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I feel like this is a nice feature. I'm trying to figure out if I'll just love it because I screencast, or if this is going to be something that everybody likes. But I think everybody's going to like it because you've all had the situation where you've been at your Mac and you need to do something quick on your phone.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is something else that we've known that there are tools for this, but other people did not, and now they're going to be like, oh, look at this, I can do this, and it's going to be great.
There's a password app.
There is, there is across
That one
everything.
gets a finally, right?
Yeah, because it has been in the settings app or in like Safari settings actually for a pretty long time. And now it is its own app. It looks like reminders or, it's a Swift UI, like a very modern Apple app. It retains the sharing that you had before. And we got an email about this a while back, and I just responded to the email. But to address it here, password sharing is not tied to your iCloud family setup. You can basically create whatever sharing groups you want. So I could have, one with just my spouse and one with our spouse and our kids and then one with coworkers. And it does two-factor authentication. It works at the system level, and there's a Windows app coming. Currently, shared passwords don't show up in the Windows extension on Chrome, is my understanding. So that seems to be fixed. And I think it being a standalone app is a good move. But to talk along the lines of what we're talking about, it does not have things like credit card storage, bank account storage, serial numbers, which is one thing I use in 1Password. Like, I have a whole bunch of serial numbers in every software. It is strictly passwords. And whether or not Apple extends to other sorts of categories, I don't know. But if you're just looking for passwords and two-factor codes, this is great. And for
Yeah.
those of us, like, I thought about my family members who like have a Rolodex of passwords on their desk. Like, okay, this is all going to be built in. They're already signed into iCloud. It's not nothing really new to learn. I think it's going to be really good. And I'm looking for. I haven't spent much time with it yet, but it's on my list to get some time with here in the next couple days.
Yeah. What about Safari? We're in the area of artificial intelligence. We just did a show on the Arc browser, which really leans heavily into it. And our question at the end of the show is Apple going to kind of come into some of these great Arc features and some of the more modern browser techniques? How do you grade them at this point?
I mean, they're kind of doing what I feel like is table stakes at this point. So the updated reader mode will pull highlights from a web page. It'll give you a table of contents of an article. Safari can help you find like links or directions more quickly. I think it's going to be pretty nice. I think in particular the summarization is going to be nice for a lot of people. Again, like they're not rewriting or like generating content with this. They're summarizing what's there, and these tools are actually pretty good at that. So I think it's a reasonable addition to Safari, and it'll be the first time a lot of people have experienced these things, right? Like the Arc browser is tiny compared to what Safari's usage is, and
Yeah.
very few of these tools work on the iPhone right now, and this will. So I think a lot of people are going to come across this for the first time this fall.
Yeah. I really like the addition of a table of contents in reader view.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing they're just reading the heading codes off the post, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But that's kind of nice because if you read anything along the form, having a dynamic table of contents, which presumably is also hyperlinked,
Yeah.
that'll be cool. I like that.
Yeah, I know like in my longer pieces, I will put headers in just so people reading it, they can know where they are, but also just to help break things up, and yeah, I think that's a good addition because in reader mode now, if you're in something long, it all kind of runs together and it can be actually kind of tricky kind of know where you are in something. And so even if this is just looking at like, okay, are there H2s or there H3s in this blog post? That's awesome. And if they're inserting them that don't exist. Like, I want to see how that works and if it works well. I'm unclear if they're adding their own or if they're just respecting what's already there.
All right. And then gaming on the Mac. That's still a thing that Apple's pushing on. You're laughing. I think
They're serious about it.
Yeah, I think this is a legitimate attempt. Game Porting Toolkit version 2 is out. It does require the game developers to do work. Apple's not like going to port it for you, but they're making it easier. I've been watching some of the videos of gaming enthusiasts that are just taking Game Porting Toolkit and porting their games, and they're very happy with the results. But it doesn't feel to me like commercially it's taken off as much as Apple would like. I'm not a huge gamer, but I do play occasional video games. Years ago, I played Baldur's Gate 2 back. Man, that was a long time ago. Whenever that game came out, but I bought Baldur's Gate 3 because they made it for the Mac, and I've only played like 2 hours of it because I'm busy and I don't have a lot of time for games. But it looks great. I feel like Apple's made progress on this, but it's in no way or near the acceptance of the PC. I mean, I just think the Mac continues to be a second-class citizen for gaming.
Yeah, and they really, when they talk about it, Apple really leans into, hey, this is the same silicon. These are the same APIs that you have on the iPhone and the iPad. And so on one hand, they're trying to attract those developers, but at the same time, they have these features that are designed to help people bring things over from Windows land. And so they are kind of working from both ends of things, I guess. And, every year, I mean, they've talked about this for so long, but they really seem to care about it and want the Mac to be seen as a reasonable gaming platform. But it's a hard thing to change, right? They've got a lot of history that shows that people aren't that interested in it. And so they're fighting uphill, but they're still fighting. And I think that's good.
In terms of the way I game, I would be kind of happy if they kept this up, but I don't expect them to become the equal to the PC in gaming. But if it's just good enough that some of the better games show up here, so, if I buy a game, it'll take me a year to finish it. So I just need one game a year, really, and
yeah.
And so that for me, just getting the good ones on the Mac, that's fine. I don't need every game, but I'm sure their goals are much loftier than that. And the problem is, I don't think the gaming industry is going to just jump when Apple tells them to, and they're not used to that.
No, and this is a bit of a tangent, but we spoke about it in More Power Users recently about the shift to ARM on Windows notebooks. Finally seems like it's happening. And there are questions there like, what about discrete GPUs, right? All the questions we had about the Mac Pro, like those questions now exist in Windows land about desktop PCs, right? If you go to a system on a chip, it's Qualcomm, their partners, are they going to have support for big, beefy GPUs? I think they have to on Windows because people want these things, but also Intel's going to stick around. It's all very complicated. But all of that stuff serves as a distraction for game developers. And if you're Valve or another game developer and you're saying, look, we got Windows x86, now we have Windows on ARM, and then there's Mac OS on ARM, like you now have another thing to contend with. And just because Mac OS and Windows are both on ARM doesn't mean you're using the same code across platform, because Apple's graphics stack is totally different with Metal. And so it's a weird time in the gaming industry, I think, in desktop gaming, because the ground is shifting in a bunch of different places, but Apple is committed to this. And from what I've seen some of those videos as well, people tinkering with the game porting toolkit, it does seem like they're really serious about making this as easy as they can and putting good tools into the hands of developers. And that's good.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to onepassword.com/MPU today to get 20% off. 1Password is so much more than a password manager. With 1Password, you can protect yourself, your family, or your global workforce with simple security, easy collaboration, and actionable insights. There's a lot of components to your online security. You need secure password sharing for your friends and family. You need to be able to automatically generate reliable passwords when creating new accounts. And the most important part, I think, is the awareness of data breaches, because even if you have great habits, the people that you have accounts with don't always protect your data, and you need a way to find out if there's a problem. 1Password keeps up with all of that for you. From passwords to passkeys and everything in between, 1Password supports it. When you go to a website, autofill always works, and if you have two-factor authentication, 1Password has that too. If you need to share any of that with friends and family, with 1Password, you can do it securely. You can share individual secrets, or you can give them access to a vault. And then there's the 1Password Watchtower. With Watchtower, you can identify weak passwords, generate strong new ones, and get notified about vulnerabilities like data breaches with the websites you use. Watchtower will even let you know if sites offer two-factor authentication or if they're using an unsecured HTTP. And all of that is in 1Password, whether you're looking at it on your phone, your iPad, your Mac, or on the web. 1Password is a company dedicated to one thing: protecting your privacy on the internet. And I'm sure glad to have that family account. We've been using it for years, and it's protected us all. And you can get 20% off today. Just go to 1password.com/MPU and get 20% off your account. So go protect yourself and your family today at 1password.com/MPU.
Let's move next to iOS and iPad OS. I put these together because even though they're separate OSs, they are very similar in terms of features. And I think we got to start with customization and the home screen because they've added a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so now I think, to me, the biggest move is you no longer have to have the grid of icons. I mean, after all these years, that's been so iconic on the iPhone. Now you can leave spaces. And there were hacks before it. You could like make dummy icons that match the background and things like that. But now you can just leave a space. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. It's wild to play with it. It's like, oh gosh, it's been this way since 2007 or 8. Whenever, initially you couldn't even change the icons before there was an app store, and then eventually you could. The app store came out and all that stuff. But yeah, you can now set it up where, like, we've all seen this, right? Where like someone's home screen wallpaper is a picture of their kid or their dog, and they got a bunch of icons on top of them, and now you could have them sort of framed by icons and widgets. So really nice. I think people are really going to appreciate that. I was looking at my personal phone. I was like, I don't like my wallpaper, just kind of like, it's like a gray pattern because I want kind of the maximum number of things on my home screen. So I don't think I will personally take advantage of it, but I guarantee you millions and millions of people will.
Yeah, I mean, and there's, with widgets and the lock screen and all this other stuff, there's a lot of other ways to get to your apps. So there's nothing wrong with that. If you've got a picture of your kid or your dog that you want to see primarily on your home screen, and it's just never been an option before. It seems to me like it's silly that it took this long, but it's here now, so that's good.
Yeah.
So you've got spaces. The other thing they did, and I think this kind of leans into the way people flipped out over Underscore's app. I think people really like to start customizing their home screen, and Apple finally took notice. And they have now the ability to have your app icons go into dark mode, so they don't look really weird in light mode with a dark background. And you can tint them to match a color, and it'll even sample the color out of the wallpaper and do its best to match that. And I guess that's okay. I mean, I think people are going to make some really ugly home screens now.
That's okay.
But it's their home screen, so who cares?
Yeah, exactly. It's their home screen. It's not Apple's. And at least, I mean, we're still very early days. We'll talk more about this next week. But like some icons work better than others in dark mode. And there is actually developer support where a developer can upload a separate dark mode icon that the system will use. And developers can also give guidance on how the system should tint their icon. And so right now, like in particular, if you have like, a lot of third-party applications have alternative app icons that have like rainbow or like 6-color stripes, and those really fall apart when you tint them. But I suspect most developers will spend a little time and really make this work, because I think a lot of people are going to want this. And I do want to underline something you said. You can pick the tint color based on wallpaper. So you get a standard color picker, but then you can also hit the eyedropper and just skim over your wallpaper and pick the color you want. And it's really intuitive. They kind of blew by it in the, I mean, just blew by it in the keynote. But using the beta, it's actually really nice to get exactly what color you want. Because, the color picker is as simple as it can be, but even simpler is just like tapping on the photo where the color is you want.
Yeah, I saw some chatter that this is going to be negative for developers because a lot of them in the paid or plus version of their apps, they give you custom icons. I don't really see it that way. I feel like if you want the custom icons, that's different than a dark mode version of the icon or a tinted version. And I think it's just kind of a nice thing. A lot of people will use it, and I probably won't. Although I may put some spaces. I don't know. I'm looking now at my apps, and do I need all of them on the screen at once? But the color tint thing to me is a bridge too far.
Yeah, that's okay. Giving people options is good, even if they're not for everybody.
Boy, Control Center, right? What a change Control Center got. So, well, it's almost a blast of the past, right? It used to be in Control Center, you could swipe right and left. I think it was media controls. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember if there was something else, but now it's, I think, basically 4 plus panels. I say plus because if you fill one up, it just adds another one. But generally, the top one is kind of the historic Control Center controls, but now you can change them out, swap them for new ones, rearrange them, make it look exactly how you want. Then in addition to that, they've got one with media controls, they've got one with HomeKit controls, and they've got one that controls all of your radios. So if you want to go in and turn on the, turn on the cellular, but turn off the Wi-Fi or whatever, you can do it all very simply there. I feel like this is a huge improvement.
I think so too. And you can leave it basically the way that it was, and like the second page is media. But I think people are going to customize this as well. And there's already some funny stuff floating around on social media of people putting like 5 or 10 or 15 like rotation lock controls, and they tap one of them and they all change. Like it'll do some goofy stuff. But I think this is really cool because it also, with this does come support for third-party apps. And so finally, after, I think Control Center came out in iOS 7 or 8. Finally, we have the ability to have third-party actions in there. And so if you use pcalc and you don't use the standard calculator, now James Thompson has the ability to create a control center. They're actually called control widgets. He could build a control widget that launches pcalc, and you could put that in there. And I think that's a huge opportunity for third-party apps. But the coolest part is that's also supported on the lock screen. And so the flashlight and the camera button that we've had since the iPhone 10, those can be swapped out for third-party controls as well. So if you want to shoot in Obscura instead of the camera app, you could put Obscura there if Ben supports it. Lots of customization, lots of flexibility. And it means people can really build kind of exactly, what they want, where they want it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about the betas next week. I'm just starting my research, but one nugget I'll share is you can also use these control elements with the action button. So if you've got an iPhone 15 Pro, you can tie the action button to actually one of the controls. And just really clever, well done. It's kind of all the features we've ever wanted for it. I was specifically thinking about James when I saw that they were open up to third parties because, there's often been a calculator there, but it's only been the Apple calculator. Mm-hmm. And you can get whichever calculator you want.
Yeah, super awesome.
There's also some nice privacy updates. You can lock an app. So I was thinking about that. What does that mean? So I already started experimenting on this. Like I use Day One daily. I know you do too. And I always think about that when I give somebody my phone to look at pictures or whatever. It's like, is this the weirdo that's going to just open up Day One and start reading my journal? because they can when I give them my phone. And with this, they will not be able to. And I understand that some of these apps have inside, they have locks inside, or they have encryption, or sometimes features inside that keep people from opening and looking at it. But this has always needed to be a system wide feature, and they added it. So good on Apple.
Yeah, it's great. This should have been here a long time ago. But you can also even go further and hide an app completely, so it's not on your home screens. It's not in the app library. How this works, at the very bottom of the app library, there is a folder called Hidden, and that folder is locked behind PIN code or Touch ID or Face ID, whatever you have on your device. And so those apps can't be launched, and they don't submit content to things like Spotlight or Siri. And every phone has that hidden folder. So you can't even tell if someone actually has something hidden or not, because all the iPhones running iOS 18, all the iPads running iPadOS 18, all have this hidden folder in the app library, which I think is a super smart way of doing it. It's way at the bottom, so it's not cluttering up your view, but it makes it much easier to kind of stash stuff away if you hand somebody your phone, or like maybe you have an iPad that your kid uses to play games. Maybe you want to put mail behind Face ID so they're not, deleting all of your email because they're 4 and don't really understand. Really nice additions.
Yeah. I actually don't really know what to do with Hide an App. I can't think of really a good use for it, but if you're making Lock an App, why not make Hide an App too? There's been a problem with contacts on the iPhone for a long time, where a app requests access to contacts, and it's binary. It's like give them all or don't give them to them. But on Photos, they fixed that. Like in Photos, a couple of years ago, they had a feature where you can give an app access to just certain photos without your whole library. Well, now they've done a similar thing with contacts.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's been such an open-ended sort of section into our personal data. And we've all done it, right? We've all installed like a messaging app, and it's like, oh, upload your contacts and that'll make it easy to find people. Like, that's fine, but I want more control over that. And I think this is a really good step in that direction.
Do you want to talk about? Well, we talked about messages earlier with respect to the Mac, but there is also more to it, particularly on iOS. Although I think almost all these features appear on the Mac as well. One is you can now format text, underline, bold, italic, strike through. We've talked about sending a message later. They have a thing called text effects, where you can make text do like things like wobble or grow. This kind of is in the same theme as the messages backgrounds and the other kind of text effects they use, where it would like drop or shrink and expand. So they've just kind of gone and pushed that button a little further. Good on Apple. I think this is probably useful. I don't know how many people are going to use those effects, but it's good they're there.
Yeah, yeah. I like that it's per word. I mean, I think they should also have more general effects, because those have been
Yes.
kind of stuck for a long time now. But again, more customization, more ways to communicate.
I'll tell you, they haven't changed at all. I mean, when they released, we had this conversation on the show, and I said, "Oh yeah, at Christmas they should make a snow effect, and in July they should have fireworks, and in February they should have hearts, and it should be a thing where it's fun to go in and see what's new." A lot of these social media apps totally use that to get people to get in. It makes it stickier, but now they're all tired. Like, how many times have you sent happy birthday to a friend with all the balloons coming up? I've done it many, many times. I want to do more than that. I do wish they had leaned into this more over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Messages via satellite. So was it 2 years ago, I think, or was it last year that they added the ability to send an emergency message via satellite?
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is if you're, out hiking in the middle of nowhere and you have something happen, you can get in touch with emergency emergency workers, even when you don't have cell service. And when that came out, it was extremely limited in terms of how you communicate because you're talking about very, very small amounts of bandwidth. And so they were like pre-canned messages, and you could, communicate within those bounds, and they would, reach somebody local, and you'd come get rescued. But now they've brought this to regular messages as well. And I just had a video out about it a couple hours ago that I'll put in the show notes. It is not full featured iMessage. Like, it is still somewhat limited in what it can send, but it does it without cellular connectivity, which is really cool.
Yeah, I approve. The question I keep reading and I don't have an answer to is, are they going to charge for it? I don't think so because they haven't said anything about it.
They haven't yet.
Yeah, that would be nice for hikers and people who go off the grid.
Yep.
I'm always interested in Apple Mail to see what Apple does. I still primarily use Apple Mail, and they did some nice modernization this year. You can now have it automatically categorize your messages as they come in, kind of like a SaneBox Lite feature, I guess I would say.
Yeah, or Gmail. Gmail does this as well, where it'll put receipts in one folder and newsletters in another. And none of these systems are perfect, right? Sometimes it will mislabel something, but this is doing it on your device. And so you can use it with any email service, and you can have it kind of manage these things for you, and then you can kind of go through them and see what you want.
They also have a feature that reminds me kind of Hey, where it can pull all the emails from a single business and kind of keep them together for you, allow you to manage them jointly. And Hey had some features like that. So I'm glad to see it evolving. Really, the story with Mail is more about Apple intelligence than it is about these features. We'll get to it later.
Yeah. Journal got some attention as well. This is, of course, a new app from Apple. It still is just on the iPhone, but they added search, which was a huge complaint about version 1 that you couldn't search your content within Journal. It also has some like writing stats within Journal, and they brought in the I think on the watch and phone last year, we got like some mental health tracking. It was like mood tracking type things. And they've basically brought that into Journal as well now, and it can keep up with that over time.
But am I right that this still isn't on iPad or Mac?
Just the phone.
Yeah. It's not ready.
Nope. It's got to be everywhere.
I don't even know why they released it as they did, but there you go.
I mean, so much of it is tied to the suggestions API, where different apps can suggest content to Journal, and they made that a third-party API, so it works with like Day One and Everlog and some others on the iPhone. But that suggestions API is not on the Mac and iPad, and so maybe they're waiting until that's there. I don't know, but yeah, it's for me, it's got to be everywhere to be viable, and so it's not an option for me yet. We got to talk about photos.
Yeah, we do. Okay, so the quote we have in the outline is biggest redesign ever. And it is a big redesign of Photos. And I feel like anytime you play with an app like Photos, you are playing with fire, because there's a lot of people who don't listen to Mac Power users who are going to flip out the first time they open Photos and it looks different, even if it's better. But I'll tell you, like I said, we're doing a beta show soon. But in general, the people I've been showing it to are pretty receptive to the changes.
Yeah, they're doing a lot more to surface content in your library, and they made a point of it in the keynote, and then in some other comments afterwards. A lot of people have tens of thousands of photos and videos. I certainly do. I know you do as well, and it's easy for those things to get lost. So they're really kind of hammering on these ideas of collections and memories to surface things from the past and making it easier to sort of time travel through your photo library, if you will. And I like all those features. I think all that's good. I'm not sold on the UI yet, but I'll hold my comments till next week. But it is a big deal because Photos is used by everyone, right? It is, I would imagine, in the list of like apps used by iPhone users, it's got to be towards the top after like Notes and Safari. And And so anytime they're in there, it's a big deal. But anything that helps me navigate my photo library or puts things together, like one of the new features is a trips feature where it's like looking at the location and who's in the photo, and it kind of will string your trips together. You can do groups of people as well. That's all really cool, and I'm excited to explore my photo library in those new ways.
Yeah. And we're both playing with it, and we'll talk more when we get to the show on the betas, because there is stuff to talk about there. Apple announced RCS support for messages. I forgot to mention earlier, but they didn't really have much to say about it at WWDC, except we know it's still coming.
Mm-hmm. That's the whole update, I think.
Yeah. On iPad, you get basically everything we just talked about on iPhone. That's the yeah. But the
which is great. I mean, right?
Yeah.
Because in the past, like some of the customization and widget stuff came to the iPad a year later, and so the new home screen, control center, Photos app, all that's coming. I think the biggest thing here is with handwriting and with the calculator. You want to talk about the calculator thing?
Yeah, so they added a calculator to the iPad, which remarkably they hadn't done until now. But they did something more to it. They called it Math Notes, and it's basically like a little scratch pad, and you can write down calculations, kind of solver style, and you can declare variables, and it will remember them, and you can change them, and it's all done with handwriting. And when it goes to give you an answer, like if you have it do an addition and you put a line at the bottom with a plus sign, it'll give you an answer. But instead of putting the answer up there in Helvetica, it writes the answer in an approximation of your own handwriting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just 100% AI show off.
It is. It definitely is. And they've been doing some handwriting stuff for years now, but this is definitely a more focused approach to it in the world of math stuff. And the calculation stuff can also be done in notes with typing. So you could type, 5 plus 5 and it should hopefully give you 10. But I think this is mostly geared towards working on an iPad with an Apple Pencil. That's how they showed it. That's how they're talking about it. And it's really cool. And I think that it's something that the iPad is sort of uniquely suited for because it has that pencil input. And so that's good to see.
Yeah, we just did a meetup in the MaxBarkey Labs today to talk about the betas, and one of the members who installed the beta pointed out that it also works in a freeform. So it makes sense,
Yeah.
Once you build it out, put it wherever it fits. And that's nice. I have to wonder if this is a feature that demos really well, but not that many people use. I feel like it's kind of in that ballpark, but we'll see. A related technology is what they call Smart Script. So when you handwrite in Apple Notes, it neatens as you write. So it doesn't like print your text as like a set typeface. It just fixes your handwriting. Like if you're sloppy with the tail on your E, it just reprints it in an approximation of your own handwriting. Crazy.
Yeah, it's big Newton vibes. And I mean that in the best possible way, because that was sort of the dream, way back then, 30 years ago. Like I could handwrite and the system knows what to do with that. And they've been inching toward this, but now it's sort of here kind of fully featured. And I'm not a big, I write by hand, but it's mostly in notebooks. I don't really ever pull out Apple Notes and handwrite. But if you're that sort of person, and a lot of people are, I think this is going to be really cool.
Another feature on the iPad that I don't want to skip is this new floating tab bar. For a long time, we've been talking about whether or not they'll ever bring a menu bar to the iPad. And I think we got our answer this year. I don't think they are going to bring a menu bar, but instead they made a floating tab bar, which kind of morphs into a sidebar. And I think that's their view of the menu bar on the iPad.
I think so too. And it's customizable, which is great. The menu system on the Mac is not, right? They are what the developer sets them to be. And I think it works. I think it makes sense for like the floating tab bar. And you've seen this like in the TV app, like Apple has used this, but I suspect we will see this appear in more third-party apps as well. And so kind of what you build across the top, gets moved down to the side as you scroll, or if you're in landscape. it feels iPad native in a way that I think if they just took a menu bar at the top, it would have felt a little bit weird. And they've struggled with this, right? This is not the first attempt they've had at like, how do we do controls on the iPad? But it seems to me at this point that I think maybe they've got it this time.
Yeah, I think this might be the winner. Another nice new feature with iPad especially for our listeners, because if you're listening to this show, you're probably the family tech support person. Well, now with the iPad and SharePlay, not only can you draw on the screen of the person you're sharing with, you can also remotely control their device. So the next time your crazy relative calls to ask you how to do something on the iPad, you can say, just click the button and now watch me show you.
Yep. Really, really good. Really good.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by SaneBox. Go to sanebox.com/MPU to sign up for the free trial and get a discount on your plan. There's a lot of talk today about artificial intelligence. You know how to get artificial intelligence working on your email today? It's at SaneBox. SaneBox brings logic to your inbox and sanity to your life. When you sign up for SaneBox, it looks at the message title and the sender's name, and it looks to see how often you reply to those people to figure out who are the important people in your life. And those are the only messages that land in your inbox. The rest of them go into what they call the Sane Later folder. So that's the first bit of AI you're getting. It's sorting your mail for you, but it goes deeper than that. You can also have it sort like newsletters into the newsletter folder, or you can make custom folders. Like I have one for Mac Sparky customer service, and SaneBox does a spooky good job of getting all those emails automatically sorted in there for me. This allows me to avoid that context shift of the inbox where I'm jumping from one subject to the next with each email. Instead, my mail is sorted by SaneBox and I can go through them systematically. But it does more than that. It sends you a digest every day at 7 a.m. of your email. It also has tools to allow you to defer mail, so you can defer it to next Tuesday at 2 p.m. or Saturday or next month. One of my favorite features is when it reminds you about emails. So if I send an email to Steven and I send a blind copy or carbon copy to 3days at sanebox.com, if Steven doesn't reply, it reminds me. This saves me so much work on things I used to have to run through OmniFocus. There's just a whole suite of features here. If you want to save attachments to Dropbox, it does that. If you want to deep clean, it does that. Whatever it is you need to do with your email, SaneBox probably has a tool for you. And the good news is it works with most email platforms. Whether you're using Apple Mail or Gmail or whatever, you can apply SaneBox. I signed up and became a paying customer years ago, and I still use it every day. If you want to learn more, go over to sanebox.com/MPU. Like I said, you'll get that discount there. You can kick the tires for yourself and check it out. The team at SaneBox has been helping me with my inbox for years. Let them start helping you today.
Can you believe watchOS is already up to version 11? Like,
Yeah, can you believe it's up to version 11? We still don't have a watch face store.
That's also true. But yeah, when they announced it, I was like, wait, 11? That can't be right. I think it's a smaller year than last year. Last year with watchOS 10, they rearranged a lot of things and had the smart stack. And honestly, that was hard for me to adjust to. Even now, a year into it or 9 months into it, whatever, sometimes I still find myself like, wait, where did that go? Because I don't know. This has taken a while to get used to the changes, but I think with some time, I've come to appreciate why they did what they did. And they're building on top of that this year, where the smart stack will gain live activity support. So I got to see this in action. If you have a live activity running on your iPhone, it projects to your watch. The app does not have to be installed on the watch. The app doesn't even have to have a watch version at all. It's projecting it there. And Apple's doing it automatically by taking what's on the right and left side of the live activity and kind of squishing them together. But developers will have the opportunity to customize how that looks. And, honestly, live activities have become one of my favorite things on the iPhone. Like I have a bunch of apps that use them now.
Yeah.
Like just this week, right? Flying to California and back. Flighty, has excellent live activity support. And I use sports tracking apps that do it, timers, all sorts of things. And now they're going to be in the smart stack on the watch. It feels like a huge win. And I think it's what I'm most excited about, other than one thing with rings, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay, well let's switch over to health because that's a big deal to Apple and the Apple Watch.
Yep.
And every year we do get substantive increases. Training load is a new feature where you can have it use, I guess, artificial intelligence to rate the intensity of your workouts. And hopefully you agree. I don't know, but
well, you can tweak them, so it does give you the ability to change. So this is really so the Whoop band and sort of ecosystem that people may be familiar with. It's in their fitness tracker. That's really what their whole thing is based on. Is sort of recovery mode, training load. Those are all kind of similar ideas. There's some third party iOS apps that do this, like Sleep Plus Plus and AutoSleep. I think AutoSleep has it as well. That kind of take all these variables and give you an idea of like, where are you? And now it's going to be built in. It's in the health app on the phone, but on the watch, it is a standalone app, which is how they normally do these things, right? The watch has, 3 apps that may just be one app on the phone. I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, a similar thing is the Vitals app, which I believe also on the iPhone is just a new component to the health app. But it tracks a bunch of your vital statistics and your health statistics over time. Like if you have a blood pressure problem or a heart rate problem, you can just keep track of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that stuff was already kind of in the health app, but making it more surfaceable is good. I think that I'm glad they're doing it. And then I think there's a feature that you are excited about.
Yeah, I am so glad they finally add the ability for rest days. So you can pause your rings if you're sick or if you're going to be in an airplane all day or you break your ankle. I experienced this firsthand twice in the last 3 years, having a pair of foot surgeries where, my activity was much lower after the first surgery for months. And I basically just went into my watch and like turned all the settings way down because it really was frustrating to see like, okay, these things aren't moving because I'm not moving. And they have finally have an affordance for that where you can tell the system, hey, this is going to be a rest day, or hey, I'm sick, pause the rings. But they even took it a step further. This kind of makes me think of some of these other features like, lock an app or hide an app. Like while we're here, let's go all the way. You can also set different goals per day. And so, for instance, if you know that, in your routine, you never work out on Mondays, maybe Mondays every week you have to work late, or there's a staff meeting, or like, something that prohibits you from working out on a specific day, and that's part of your routine, you can tell the ring system, hey, my goal normally is 30 minutes of exercise, but on Mondays it's going to be 15. And then that's what it uses for the goal on that day of the week. Super cool. Thank you, whoever finally championed this hard enough with an Apple, because we've needed more customization over this for a long time.
Yeah. And, the ring streak thing, I was super into it in the early days of Apple Watch, but that happened. Like I got sick, get the flu for a day, and then your like 8-month streak breaks. And you know what happens? I don't start the streak again.
Yeah.
It's just like you give up. And I think this is going to be actually probably re-energize me to try and keep the streaks going again. So I think it's probably for the better.
I think so too. There's a lot to that, to the psychology of streaks, and there's other apps out there like Gentler Streak and others that have done some of these things where you can track these things a little bit easier. And so it's really good that it's in the system, and I think it's really beneficial because those things are important to a lot of people, and you don't want to feel like you've lost all progress because you were sick for 2 days, because that's not reality, right? If you are working out and being active, 2 or 3 days off because you got the flu is not setting your progress back. But on paper, it's going to look like that because the rings don't move. And so they have finally sort of aligned that with reality.
And then watch faces. I was making jokes earlier about it, but I really am disappointed with the Apple Watch faces. The Ultra faces are pretty cool. I'll admit, if you spend the money to buy the Apple Watch Ultra, you get some nice faces. But this year, the only face we got was a machine learning generated face where it looks through your photos and finds a photo and structures the photo so you can have a photo of a family member, your pet, with a watch face on it. But they didn't actually add any new watch faces other than that. They didn't make a third party app store or a toolkit. And I just feel like maybe they're just never going to do it. I mean, I'm starting to kind of feel like give up hope on this. Like they just aren't willing to do it. We're going to have to use whatever faces they deem appropriate for the duration.
Yeah, I have that fear too. And what they did this year, like it is cool if you're into the photos watch face. I'm not because I want maximum information, but
Yeah.
you can make some really nice looking things now. But yeah, it's really frustrating that we can't take this into our own hands.
Vision OS 2, which is maybe called 1.5. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's a small list of features, but in fairness, they just released the hardware months ago. So it's hard to expect them to do a whole 2.0 just a few months later. They did show that they've got more content they're working on, but they didn't make any promises. What I was hoping on the content would be like, oh, yeah, we're going to release an immersive video every month for the rest of the year,
yeah,
But they didn't do that. They said, we have one coming. I'm like, well, is it coming today? Is it coming, I don't know. I just feel like they've kind of dropped the ball a bit on content because so much of that device is content consumption and there's not a lot of good vision content to consume.
totally agree. I don't know what's going on over there. I don't know if it's much harder to make than they thought it would be, but it's a little frustrating.
Did they just think third parties were going to carry the weight? Like the Marvel thing is cool. The what if thing, that's really fun. But maybe they thought there'd be a lot more people making stuff like that, so they didn't have to. Did you watch the recent one on parkour that they just released the immersive video?
Yeah, it was fine. Like I think it was better than the soccer one. That one I think was
Yeah,
pretty poorly edited, but it's yeah, I want more of that. Come on.
yeah. It actually scared me. I mean, I think I'm afraid of heights. I learned that watching that. But yeah, it was cool. But that was the first one since release. And what's that been? 4 or 5 months now?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yep.
So they added a feature that can take a 2D image and turn it into a 3D image, a spatial photo.
Yeah.
Um, we'll talk. We're both going to have betas installed, so we'll be able to weigh in on this stuff when we get there. Some new gestures, hands up. If you just put your hand up, it gives you the home view rather than having to push the button. And if you flip your hand over, it gives you control center and battery. I think that's all good. I believe that Apple has a whole list of gestures. They're just not releasing them all at once because they don't want to overwhelm people. I feel like they're going to dribble these things out for the next 3 or 4 years.
I think so too. And I think if they had dumped like a bunch more new ones, I think it would be kind of overwhelming. I think the best one of these is that ability to bring down control center because right now you kind of have to look up just with your eyes and it's kind of awkward, and now you can just have your hand over and tap your fingers together and it'll show it sort of where you're looking. I think that's much better.
Yeah. If you want a virtual Mac display, they've got a new method to do it. It's where you get two 4K monitors. And the example was like two side by side, like one of those super wide monitors.
Yeah.
And the technology behind it's interesting. The Mac is rendering foveated rendering. So wherever you look, it's in focus, but to the side, it's out of focus, which is what lets you make it that big. But the compute work is being done on the Mac, not on the Vision OS device. Kind of clever.
Yeah, I think it's clear that to go bigger, the that it needed the horsepower of the Mac helping the Vision Pro out, and so not only for rendering but also the bandwidth, right? Because it is. They said the resolution is as if it were two 4K displays, but in practice it's one widescreen. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of data to push wirelessly. And so they are doing these tricks to make all of that work. And, we got friends who really swear by the Mac Virtual Display, and I think it's going to be be quite nice to be able to spread out a little bit more and have that extra real estate. The other thing that it's just a small thing, but I'm excited in Vision OS is that you'll be able to rearrange the home view. It's been that grid of that sort of honeycomb like image apps, and compatible apps are stuffed in a folder, and third party apps are off to the side, and they're alphabetical. And now you can rearrange them just like any other device.
I want to test it. Like I could feel like this is like the old days of arranging a home screen on your Mac, and it's going to be rough. So hopefully it's not. But that's one thing I'm worried about here.
Yeah, I could see that, like the actual mechanism to rearrange it. Like maybe you accidentally shoot an app way too far.
Yeah. New developer tools, tabletop kit where you can put things on a horizontal surface, and more enterprise stuff. Well, at the price of the device, of course, they were going to have enterprise tools. And the thing shipped with plane mode, the idea that you would be on an airplane going really fast, and if you put a window up, it would just fly through the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
What they found when people bought it is that people commute on trains, and people were setting up windows on the train, and when the train left the station, they left their window back at the station. Well, they fix that now, train mode.
Yep, that was a very funny thing. And then version 1, I think in Casey Neistat's video, he showed it happening. Like the subway pulled away and his Safari window was left behind. Assumingly it's still out there somewhere. Like, do you ever think about that? Like, what happens to a window if you never go back? Is it there forever? I don't want to know the answer to that because that's very troubling emotionally. But yes, it'll work much better. And look, a lot of people do travel by train, so that's awesome.
It's like the Toys movie, and they're just really sad because they've been left alone forever.
That's so sad.
I hate to break it to you, but
that's terrible. There's also some input stuff. So bringing mouse support, it's been trackpad only so far. So if you've got, and I'm unclear if it's just Apple mice or third-party mice as well, but you got mouse support. And when you are in an environment, your keyboard will pass through as well. There's been...
Your Apple keyboard will pass through.
I was going to say, there's been a lot of back and forth about this. Some people, like it seems to sometimes, on occasion, work with a third-party keyboard, but Apple says it's for Apple keyboards. And so if your keyboard happens to work sometimes, you're getting lucky because the system's getting tricked, but it is for Apple keyboards only.
Yeah.
But good, because right, if you dialed all the way in and you can still see your hands, but like, you couldn't see your keyboard, that's a problem for a lot of people. And so now you can be all the way in an environment and still see what you're typing.
Yeah. And if you're in parts of Asia and Europe, you're going to be able to buy one very soon. So that's good.
Yes.
We have a lot of international listeners. Even if you're not interested in buying one, once they launch in your country, go do the demo. It's totally worth it. Understand that the demo is engineered to get you to buy one, and it's going to show you the very best of the device, but it's absolutely worth doing.
Yes. So it is coming China, Japan, Singapore, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and the UK. And yes, I wholeheartedly echo that. Go do the demo, because we've been talking about this thing now. It's been out for 4 or 5 months. It's still hard to talk about what the Vision Pro is like to use, and the demo really can give you a good look at it.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is made possible by KRCS, one of the oldest Apple premium resellers and your one-stop shop for all things Apple in the UK. Go to krcs.co.uk/podcast and get free next working day delivery. At KRCS, you can shop for the latest Apple products online and in-store, book an Apple certified repair, or even trade in your pre-loved devices. For their UK listeners, right now at KRCS, you can spread the cost with 12 months interest-free credit on any Mac over £1,000. That means you can buy the latest MacBook Air M3 from just £78 per month over 12 months, completely interest-free, when you shop online at krcs.co.uk or in store at their 3 high street stores. KRCS are one of the few places in the UK where you can customize the specs of your Mac, whether it's a faster processor, adding more storage or extra memory, or all three. You can do it at KRCS. You'll get the exact specifications you want with pricing you won't find anywhere else. Many of the popular models and configurations are kept in stock for next working day delivery when you order before 3 p.m. Monday to Friday. So why not make your Mac yours and build your own? Or choose one from stock. As long as it's over £1,000, it qualifies for 12 months interest-free credit. With free next working day delivery on in-stock items ordered before 3 p.m., there's never been a better time to get a Mac at KRCS, your local Apple experts. Get more information at krcs.co.uk/podcast or click the link in the show notes. 18 plus only, subject to approval and terms and conditions apply. Please spend responsibly. Borrowing beyond your means could seriously affect your financial status. Ensure you can afford to make your payments on time by the due date. And our thanks to KRCS for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
What's next is Apple Intelligence, AI for the rest of us. For the rest of us, of course, is a very loaded term. That's how they debuted the original Macintosh, as a computer for the rest of us. Just putting that out there, that's the level they're talking about. This is a series of related and interlocking tools and features across the platforms. So iPhone, iPad, and Mac. This stuff is not on Vision OS. It's the main three. And they are there to accelerate and assist your work, really in the areas of writing and imagery. Is that a fair overview? I thought for like 2 days like how to explain that in 2 sentences. So hopefully I did a good job.
Yeah, I think you did a good job. But I think also like a little bit of history on this. Like Apple has been accused of being behind on artificial intelligence, and I don't agree. I feel like in terms of hardware, they've been doing neural engines, I think, before most of the other big manufacturers were doing them.
Yeah.
And they've been putting artificial intelligence under the name machine learning into their operating systems for years, and they say it every year. I remember last year you and I were on the campus for the WWDC, and we asked each other at the time, you think they'll say artificial intelligence? And they didn't. The only thing they said was that the new text was using a transformer model, which is basically artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's the T in GPT.
Yeah. So the question going in this year, are they going to just adopt the term artificial intelligence, which doesn't really seem very Apple-y? I think they like to do their own branding. And I think in the case of artificial intelligence, of all things, it makes a lot of sense for Apple to do their own branding, because we don't know the whole story about artificial intelligence yet. We don't know if it's going to start killing people, by poor implementation. It's definitely going to put some people out of jobs. And, just look at the reaction to the trumpet getting smashed, in the ad they did for the iPad. People are sensitive about this right now. And I don't blame Apple for not wanting to use the term artificial intelligence, but it still was an open question going to this keynote, whether they would just embrace it or not. And sure enough, they didn't. They, throughout the first half, they found all sorts of ways to call it artificial intelligence without saying it. They did machine learning. At one point, Tim Cook said intelligence, but he didn't say artificial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But eventually they dropped the new name, Apple Intelligence, and it was heavily rumored at the end. But I'm not mocking them for that. I think that was probably a smart move. Before we get to the features, I just want to point out that, like a lot of terms that Apple puts in, like iCloud, Apple Intelligence, it's not a single thing. They use these as umbrella terms, and then they put collections of components underneath it. And that's something that you really need to understand about Apple Intelligence. There's a bunch of different features. It's not just one.
Yeah. And they relate to each other in kind of these different and interesting ways. So we mentioned earlier the Safari reader view having a summarization feature. Well, one of the things you can do with Apple Intelligence is have it summarize things like documents or email messages. So, right, it's a summarization tool and it's sort of exposed in different ways.
Yeah. And they built a universal tool for this that works in Apple Mail and Notes, but it's probably going to work in Drafts and any other app that has a text box and common API implementation.
Yes.
So they made a component that anyone can tap into to bring writing tools to places that you write. And that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. The text-based tools do require an app to use TextKit 2. I saw Greg, our friend who writes drafts, about that because I'm not sure he's on TextKit 2 yet, so maybe he's got an upgrade in his future. Um, so things like Notion or Craft may not have it depending on their exact implementation under the hood, but
Yeah.
in more traditional Mac apps, Mail, Pages, Keynote, Notes, those sorts of things. Microsoft Office, maybe, I'm not sure. These tools will be there. And it's, I kind of think about it, or their implementation kind of reminded me of dictation, right? Like you can still do everything you normally do. And most people probably don't know dictation is just a keyboard shortcut away. But if you want to engage these tools, they're there for you. I really got the impression in the way they presented it is that Apple doesn't have any of these features in your face. Like they're there if you want to use them and engage with them. And if you don't, that's totally fine too. And I think that's the right approach because Apple had to thread the needle here of like, how do we make this useful for our users and not just build cool tech demos? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we did our AI episode, like Perplexity and ChatGPT and all these other things, Gemini, they all do things like this, but they are all, other than Gemini and some Copilot stuff, like they're kind of standalone things. And Apple's challenge was, how do we harness these? How do we narrow them down? And how do we integrate them into your inbox in your mail app on your iPad, right? And not just be like a text box you talk to in the sky.
Yeah. And that's actually the challenge and an opportunity because that gives them more flexibility with your data. But yeah, I want to take another sidebar here because something I forgot to mention earlier, when they announced Apple Intelligence, they announced 5 principles that they built it upon. And I think that was not Apple blowing smoke. I think that was something that was very key to them as they kind of architected all of this. So the 5 words were powerful, intuitive, integrated, personal, and private. And that was the idea is if we're going to do this, it needs to be powerful, but it needs to be able to use your personal data and it needs to be private. It's the first time I've ever heard an AI company kind of defining principles like that. And maybe others have, but I think this grouping is very unique to Apple. And the two that really Apple gets to leverage that I think kind of go throughout this conversation is the personal and the private. That is something that makes business sense for them to do, but it's also very advantageous for the user.
And that's where Apple's at their best, I think. Apple's at their best when they give people tools to push the boundaries of what they can do. Yeah. And I think Apple, for the most part, walked that line. They've got one feature that I think crosses the line and that I have very complicated feelings about. But I like that they led with the principles, right? Because I wrote that piece and other people, talked about similar things of like, how does Apple do this and stay Apple and like stay true to what they promise about their brand and their experience? And I think for the most part, they were able to do that.
Yeah. All right. Sidebar ended. In addition to writing tools, they also have image generation. I'm much less interested in image generation than I'm the writing tools.
I am too. The writing tools for summarization or tone or turn this into a poem, that's one thing. It's the image, and the imagination is where I think they maybe crossed a line that I didn't think that they would. So there's 2 main features under image generation. The first is the ability to create custom emoji with a prompt. And so their example, which I loved, was like a dinosaur on a surfboard, like genuinely fun, cute, adorable. I would send that to people all day long. That's one thing. And the other thing, though, is like where you can actually have it create an image. And there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can start with a sketch and it creates an image. You can give it a prompt. You can kind of give it kind of a word cloud type thing. There are some boundaries. These images that Apple is generating for you are only in a couple of styles. So it's like one is like sketched, sketch style. I forget what they call the other ones, but none of them are photorealistic. And that clearly was a boundary for Apple. And that came up in the talk show with John Gruber. We're like, we don't want you to be able to create a photorealistic image with our tools for a bunch of reasons, right? Deep fakes, fake news stories, on and on and on. There's a lot of harm in being able to make photorealistic images. So Apple is not allowing their system to do that. And that is good. But I do worry about having those image generation tools in the hands of everybody. Because look, people like us, and we listen to our shows, we've been playing with these tools for a couple of years now. But when it's on the iPhone, suddenly billions of people have it in a way they've never had access to it before. And even sketches or sort of like cartoony images can be used for harm. And I do worry about that. I have lots of questions around parental controls. Like, can I turn this off on my kids' phones if I want to? Or if I find that it's an issue down the road? Like, these are unknowns at this point. But the image generation, I wasn't sure they were going to go there. And while I really appreciate the lack of realistic images being an option, I do just like it sort of just raises my eyebrow about how this could be used and if Apple has maybe bitten off more than it was ready to chew.
Yeah. Although I agree, and I think the images don't look that good on top of it, so yeah, I just don't see myself using that very often, but I can think of certain family members that'll go crazy with it. And that's something I'm going to have to deal with. That's my cross to bear. One of the other features that they talked about, and to me, this is the home run part of this presentation, is the ability to use your data and attach it to an LLM, a large language model, that will then run automation and get actual functions done on your device, locally to your device, using your data. Like the example they used was, find the time my mom is landing based on what she told me in a text message and book a reservation. I mean, it was kind of complicated, but they're combining data from messages and the web and different and calendar, and they were doing all of this with just an LLM command. And that is something that Apple can do that, frankly, ChatGPT can't. When you look at these big LLMs, they don't have access to your calendar and your messages. So that's not a data source for them, and they can't work with that. And by making it private and local, Apple has got this huge leg up. And I'm not sure that the message got across enough, but this is going to make Apple Intelligence, I think, very useful, assuming it works.
Yeah, because it's grounded in your reality. And that is such a huge thing. You're totally right. These other tools, they know about the world, and we'll talk about Apple's solution to that in a minute. But this is the first time it's been a personal sort of intelligent assistant in this way. And the way Apple's doing it is there's basically like 12 categories of data that applications can donate to the system. Not all of those are available on day one, maybe. Apple's very hand wavy about like, there's a lot of future tense verbs in the Siri section. There's a lot of them. And they've said it's going to be releasing in beta this fall, only in US English. Like, that's all unknown. So, but it's going to be very limited in scope at first. But the promise is there of like, if I can apply these tools to my own information, my own life, my own email, that is potentially very powerful. And I think Apple Apple believes that it is, and that's definitely how they talked about it. And so that is very exciting because that does make these tools less abstract and more concrete for the everyday user.
Yeah. Some other practical uses is it seems like Siri got a brain transplant. I thought the demo was very convincing and impressive, but we haven't actually used it yet. But it looks like we're at a turning point for Siri. Boy, I sure hope we are.
Me too. They have kind of supercharged this Siri with some of these tools. And again, I'm really glad you said what you did. Like Apple Intelligence is a collection of overlapping features. Siri is in that mix too. It's like at points it's unclear where one ends and one begins. And I think that's ultimately I think that's fine. It's a marketing exercise more than anything else. But I want my devices to more reliably do the things that I ask them to do. And not only reliably, but more consistently. How many times have you asked Siri for something and it works one time and doesn't work the next time? It's like, I don't understand. Like this used to be fine and now it's not. And hopefully they've cured a lot of those issues.
Yeah, where it's the exact same command, and an hour later it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like what happened?
Yeah, it's just such a joke, and I'm tired of it being a joke. I really hope it works, but I think they need it to work. I mean, not only does it benefit the users, I feel like the business community and Wall Street at large now are kind of awake to this. And if Apple can't prove it has the chops to pull this off, there's going to be consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And so much of this feels risky for Apple. From almost any angle, there's potential downside, but clearly they felt that it was important to implement these features, even though in the background they've been working on machine learning for years and they've shipped features for years. This is a new type of feature set that people are looking for now. And they were the only major operating system vendor that didn't have them, right? The web has it with Gemini and ChatGPT and Perplexity and others. It's in Windows with Copilot powered by OpenAI. It's in Android powered by Gemini. And so iOS, iPadOS, macOS, they were the OSs that didn't have these features. And eventually that was going to prove problematic. And so they decided to move.
Yeah. There's much more to Siri. It can look at the screen display and answer questions and work based on the data presented there. Again, it's accessing your personal data. I think what do they call it? Your semantic.
Yeah, it's like semantic model or something.
Yeah. I forgot the term of art, but basically they've designed it in a way that it can dip into your data and get what it needs, but nothing more to do work for you, which is again not a feature you're going to get on other platforms, at least yet. And I think this is what Apple needed to do. They needed to come in and say, well, we're not going to compete with ChatGPT by making a stronger LLM. I'm not sure they even could if they wanted. But instead, we're going to compete on making features that are useful to users, which is kind of the Apple way. But, it's all dependent on this working. And to me, Siri is definitely the canary in the coal mine here. Once that beta comes out with this stuff enabled, the first thing I'm going to do is spend a few minutes with Siri and see if it's truly better or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping that that they're able to deliver what they've shown us. And, having it be a beta at release, like that does buy them some forgiveness, I think, but they do have to prove they can do it. Not much. Because they don't have the track record. Like Siri doesn't have the goodwill amongst its users. Like Apple's cashed all that in, right? Yeah. And they say we've improved Siri. They really have to have a minute.
Well, I mean, they chose not to take any risks to make it better for a long time, and so now they're saying the right words. They just got to prove it. But I don't want to make this all about that. Apple Mail, we talked about it earlier, but there's more. From the Apple Intelligence spectrum, Smart Reply. And this one was kind of clever. It almost makes like a form for you when replying to a message and asks you to kind of fill in the blanks. I thought that was kind of I've never seen that done before. Kind of interesting. Another feature that I think would be useful for me is when you see a list of messages, all you see is the first few words of the message. You don't get the actual content of the message. Now it summarizes it in the inbox for you. Kind of nice.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I mean, how many times does like the preview in the inbox not show you what the message is actually about? It's like, yeah, Summarize that stuff for me. Give me those tools to better understand. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. Notifications, it will try to prioritize your notifications for you. I thought there was a lot of hand waving going on about this during the
Yeah.
presentation. It's another one we've got to see. I mean, it's all in the details and how that's played out, and can you customize it, or will it learn when you tell it that this isn't important? There's a lot of questions for me on that one.
Yeah, I don't really know what that feature is supposed to do. Like, we just have to see. That's not
Yeah.
super clear.
My default usually is just right swipe and say, "Don't ever notify me again." So
Yes,
that's my AI.
that's great. That's really good. Um, the so all this is these are tools Apple's made in house. They've developed these tools. They work with their apps, their frameworks, their APIs, and there are a couple
Yeah.
we haven't touched on. Like there's some transcription and recording and transcribing a phone call. Some summarization stuff there as well. But I think what's making the headlines the few days after WWDC is the partnership with OpenAI.
Yeah. So we talked about personal data a lot so far in this segment, but a few minutes ago, Stephen talked about global data. What if you want to, find out the life story of King Tutankhamun, right? The LLM that Apple's installing on your device isn't going to know. So when you ask for that type of knowledge, it's going to send you out to ChatGPT. Now, they made arrangements with ChatGPT, and from what I've been able to tell from Apple interviews and whatnot, is that they're going to do the search for you, give you a result, but they're not going to use the search for their training data. And they may not even be aware of who you are. But if you've got a ChatGPT account, you can log in to presumably get some additional features. But basically, Apple is offloading that type of AI to ChatGPT with public statements that they're not limiting it to just ChatGPT. They're in talks with Google about Gemini and any other LLMs that emerge in the future. I would imagine they would want to be able to make agreements with.
Yeah, and Apple is very clear, I think, in the user experience where the lines are. So everything we've talked about to this point, Apple's doing it either on device or in the cloud. We're going to loop back to that in a minute. When Siri thinks, or the system thinks, okay, this would be something that an external model would be useful for, you can select to do that. Moving content to OpenAI is never done without your express consent. The integration actually is off by default, is my understanding. And then it shares the minimum amount of information it needs to with ChatGPT, and then it returns its results. And in the bottom of the screen, there's a little thing of warning about hallucinations, which Apple system may also do. We don't know. In fact, in the Wall Street Journal, Tim Cook said we're not 100% that we've solved that. But I think the line is very clear in the software where the lines are. And I think a lot of the confusion in the world right now is that, OpenAI is doing all of this stuff on the iPhone. And that's just not true.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's almost intentional misrepresentation. I mean, Apple was clear enough about it. I don't know how people got that wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially, when it's smart people publicly stating that. I just don't get it. But the fact is, you're private with your personal data, and then when you go out global, you get sent out to ChatGPT. I mean, you could also honestly just go to the ChatGPT website and do it there, but Apple's trying to make the decision for you, make it easier, so you just got one place you put it in. But I don't know, it's pretty clear to me that where the privacy lines are drawn. But we've got more on that in the outline. We're going to get back to that. I don't think there's really much more to say about that than that. It's going to go to ChatGPT at the beginning, and I think Apple has made no mystery of the fact that they want to bring other engines in.
Yeah.
One thing I can tell you from talking to Labs members is, where is this all going to be available? People are upset, frankly, because the iPhone only goes back 1 year to the iPhone 15 Pro, whereas the iPads go back to the M1 iPad. I've actually got a theory on that. I haven't been able to run it to ground yet, but I'm pretty sure it's RAM. The iPhone 15 Pro has 8 GB of RAM, and the earlier ones do not.
Yep.
Whereas the iPads were getting more RAM. Have you been able to look into that? Are you
That's my
familiar?
understanding as well, is that it's a
Yeah,
memory limitation, which is why the iPhone 15 can't run it and the 15 Pro can. So not
yeah,
even all the phones that were sold in the last
yeah,
cycle can run it. That is rough. I mean, there's no way around it, right? If you bought an iPhone 15, not getting these features 9 months later or a year later, like that stinks. I think that they're pretty firm on that though, and I think that they would not want to ship something that is not performant, and so they don't want to give people these tools that are going to be really slow and get in the way of their work. But it's tough, and on Dithering, Ben Thompson and John Gruber were talking about like, is this a fallout because Apple was working on this up until the last minute, and this wasn't always the plan to like ship them only to half the new phones? I don't know, but if you're cut out of that, it is a bummer. So iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, M1 or later iPads, M1 or later Macs, no Intel Macs, no A series iPads. That's tough because there's a lot of those devices out there that aren't going to be able to run this stuff. And just the
yeah.
Apple Intelligence stuff, right? There's separate system requirements for iOS 18 and macOS Sequoia. It's just these layer of features on top. Not everybody will have access to.
Yeah, and I understand the RAM limitation. I mean, I'm sure the LLM is going to take a huge amount of memory, but presumably they knew this when they were making the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 13. I mean, why didn't they put the increased RAM in earlier?
I
Yeah,
mean,
but
or did they think that they didn't need it and something
yeah,
changed, right? That was sort of
yeah,
Ben's idea on Dithering, was like, maybe this wasn't always the plan.
yeah,
Because it is
yeah,
kind of unlike Apple, because really they do a pretty good job at supporting older devices generally.
yeah.
But yeah, the system requirements are pretty steep for the Apple Intelligence stuff.
And related to Apple Intelligence, Apple developers or independent developers got a lot of toys that we've been kind of hoping they'd get for a long time, like App Intents. And so suddenly it's going to be much easier to make your app play with Siri and as a offside benefit, shortcuts with some of the stuff. Like in addition to the control center, the App Intents now is open to third-party developers. Good stuff.
Really good stuff. And building on top of Appetence is super smart. That system has been there for a couple of years now. And developers will also have access to LLM tools within Xcode, Apple's development software. That requires a Mac with 16 gigs of RAM, not 8. Another
Oof.
pretty rough, because
Yeah,
there's a bunch of 8 gig machines running out there, right? It's the base
yeah,
across the board,
yeah.
basically. But that will offer things like code completion and a lot of tools around Swift development coming to Xcode. And talking with developers last week, a lot of them are really excited to see how that plays out. Those have been in other development tools and other platforms, and now Xcode will get them as well.
Yeah, I mean, for so long, Apple has been playing kind of fast and loose with the base RAM in their devices. And I feel like they should have upped it. It's so easy to spend other people's money, but how much would it really cost to put 8 gigs of RAM into an iPhone or 16 gigabytes of RAM in a MacBook when they're $1,000 plus machines? I don't know.
It's not a it's a rough look, and
Yeah,
it's another log on the fire of 8 gigs is not reasonable for a baseline MacBook Pro, at least. Maybe the MacBook Air is a different story, although you can totally develop on a MacBook Air. It has the processing power otherwise, but it's rough. I mean, if you're, I thought about, I feel like this year for the first time in a long time, met a lot of first time developers who were at WWDC more than the last couple of years post COVID,
yeah.
and a lot of young people writing their first apps. And it was awesome. One person came up to me and was like, "I've been listening to you since I was in high school, and my bones turned to dust, David." It was like, well, I'm a goner, but really cool and like super encouraging to have people coming into this ecosystem all the time. But a lot of those types of developers are buying low end systems because it's what they can afford. Maybe they're still in school
Yeah.
and not having access to the tools because they didn't check the 16 gig of RAM boxes. It can't feel good if you're in those shoes.
Yeah. And I think we'll get a tell on this in September when they release the new iPhones. Hopefully the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro will both have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and hopefully they've kind of learned the lesson. It would really suck if they had a new iPhone come out that didn't have enough RAM to run all this cool Apple intelligence. Yikes. Well, let's wait till September. Let's see what happens.
We'll see. We'll hold our powder on that. But
Yeah.
I would hope that moving forward, any iPhone would be fine.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go to expressvpn.com/MPU for high-speed, secure, and anonymous VPN services and get an extra 3 months for free. A few decades ago, it was easy to be a private person. What's changed? Well, the internet. Think about everything you've browsed, searched for, watched, or posted. The sad truth is that data can be crawled through, collected, and aggregated by third parties. To keep your data private when you go online, you can turn to ExpressVPN. One of the easiest ways for data brokers to track you is through your device's unique IP address, which also reveals information about your location. With ExpressVPN, your IP address is hidden. That makes it much more difficult for data brokers to monitor, track, and monetize your private online activity. There are loads of reasons to choose ExpressVPN over other VPNs. First, it encrypts 100% of your network traffic to keep your data safe from hackers when you're on public Wi-Fi. Plus, it works on all your devices, phone, laptop, tablet, you name it. Just tap one button to turn it on and you're protected. It's that easy. We're headed into summer. A lot of us have travel plans. This is a particularly good time to get yourself into ExpressVPN because when you get into those airports and hotels, you don't want to get on that Wi-Fi. You need ExpressVPN protecting you. But you don't have to travel across the world to use it. You can use it just going down the street to the coffee shop. Whenever I leave home, I always have ExpressVPN turned on. So protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/MPU. That's expressvpn.com/MPU, and you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. The URL one last time, expressvpn.com/MPU, and our thanks to ExpressVPN for their support of the Mac Power Users and all of Relay FM. And private artificial intelligence, which is the first big vendor to talk about artificial intelligence, making that a priority, which I'm happy about. You know, as someone who buys Apple hardware and podcasts about Apple, I think they're doing the right thing.
I do too. A ton of the stuff we've spoken about happens on device. So there's no data leaving your laptop or your phone. You can do it offline. They mentioned that about the Xcode tools. Like that all happens on your computer. They're not sending your code to a server somewhere to be handled. It's all happening locally. It means you can be on an airplane in airplane mode, and these features still work. But there are times, and it's a little unclear to me exactly when this happens or what features need outside resources. But there are times where Apple will need to use server-side components for some of these features. And so there's difference number one. Difference number one is a lot of things, if not most things, are happening on the device in the palm of your hand or on your desk. But when things do need to be handled by something in the cloud, Apple has built a complete end-to-end solution for that as well, with privacy at the center of it. And that is difference number two, because that is not a guarantee with some of these other tools. And Apple wanted a solution that users' data was just as safe on their local machine as it was on a cloud machine.
This is like truly an Apple thing. So they made a server that runs Apple Silicon, and it basically acts as an external brain for your phone or your iPad or your Mac. And when it gets an Apple Intelligence question that it doesn't have the compute power for. It sends it up there, but it doesn't just send it there. It sends it up there encrypted. And when it's done and gets the answer and spits it back to you, it destructs the data locally. So there's no record of it. It's a entirely private cloud compute. PCC is what they call it. At the labs meetup, I was asking, because there's a lot of smart people in there. I'm not aware of anybody ever building something like this.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a VPN, but I don't think this is something that normal companies make, like a computer entirely devoted to answering a question, but completely anonymizing and not storing any data. I love this.
It's really cool. So they're building their own servers with Apple Silicon. Mark Gurman says that's the M2 Ultra, but you can imagine a world where they will create their own custom silicon for servers. These aren't, I get the sense these aren't Mac Pros stuck in a data center. This is something.
Sure. It's a
custom
proprietary thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's on a rack, I'm sure. Right?
Yes. Yeah. But it's not, as cool as a rack full of Mac minis is, this is something Apple's built just for this. It's within their existing data centers. It has its own operating system and Apple made a big deal of this again in the talk show, of the image of these servers, the operating system they run, which they would not talk about other than it's something they built. So some derivative of iOS or macOS, that security researchers have access to those images to probe them, to understand them. And Apple has built in checks and balances where if a server is not listed as known good, no Apple device will talk to it. So say that I have some sort of request on my phone that needs private cloud compute to finish. If the server my phone reaches out to is not on a trusted manifest of known good, known safe servers, the iPhone will refuse the connection and move to the next one. So if a server is somehow contaminated or access is gained in a way that's not supposed to, or someone sets up a server trying to trick someone's iPhone, that should not be possible with this system. And in talking with people this week, I can tell you, if this had not been ready, they would not have shipped this. Apple views this as critically important to this whole endeavor. And they weren't going to do it in a way that wasn't secure for their users. They're using things like the secure enclave for some of that manifest checking. Like, they're using all the tools in their arsenal to make sure this is safe and secure. And I, for one, appreciate that, because these models have access to my data, right? They're skimming my email. They are helping me generate images out of my photo library. I want that to be private and secure. And Apple has built this entire tool chain, this entire life cycle of a request to make that possible.
Yeah, amen. Just make it work. That's the whole question mark over this. I don't think anybody disagrees with the ideas and the philosophy and the principles of it, but it's still, when I say, find the email from mom and book a restaurant, it needs to do that, so. So so long as it delivers, but I think this is absolutely the way they do it. I mean, the more I've been thinking about it over the course of the week, I feel like Apple has redefined artificial intelligence in the consumer context in a way that didn't exist before. Like I said earlier, it seems like so far it's been an arms race to see who can make the biggest, baddest, smartest LLM on the planet. And Apple just played a different game. They said, let's make something that's useful to people and lets us use their private data in a safe way and protect the privacy of the user. I feel like this is going to ripple. I feel, some of these other companies are going to have to come play Apple's game to stay in the market.
And I think there's another angle to that, which is like the environmental and efficiency angle, in addition to security and privacy. A lot of data centers that run these things are full of really hot GPUs, including, by the way, XAI is apparently opening a data center in Memphis and is going to have like the world's biggest supercomputer like down the road from me. We'll see if that happens or what that means. but that thing is going to be hot and require a lot of power and a lot of cooling. And Apple's approach here, because they're using Apple Silicon and because they manage the whole stack, they say that this is happening in their existing data centers that are already powered by 100% clean energy. We're not talking about just like carbon offsets, but like actual clean energy powering of these things. And that Apple Intelligence makes no impact to their 2030 goals. You know, Apple has that big, like, the entire company will be carbon neutral by 2030. That this does not change that date. That is incredible. A very real and very reasonable concern about these tools is the environmental impact. And Apple seems to have addressed that in addition to the privacy and security. So I do think there'll be room for other companies to look at this and say, with the uprising of Qualcomm and others making ARM chips for x86, like, or for Windows, I should say, not x86. There's going to be opportunity here for this to spread. And I hope that it does, because the environmental impact of these tools is great. We need to limit that as much as we can and make it as secure and private as we can. So I really feel like Apple's checked all the boxes here. And I have no reason not to believe them, because Apple takes this stuff really seriously.
Yeah, all the right words. And I feel like a very impressive presentation by Apple. I understand why they called it Apple Intelligence, and I am on board with it. Again, I won't say it anymore, but we still need this stuff to work. I can't have another year of Siri being garbage.
I'm hopeful.
Fingers crossed. We'll let you know as the betas start arriving and we get to spend more time with it. We'll keep you in the loop. Steve and I are both very interested in artificial intelligence and the potential uses for us. But I think as Apple users, we may be some of the biggest early beneficiaries of artificial intelligence just because of the way that Apple's implemented it. So good for us. I want to thank our sponsors today, 1Password, SameBox, KRCS, and ExpressVPN. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. If you'd like to get the ad-free extended version of the show, More Power Users, you can sign up for it right there. We'd love to have you. Today on More Power Users, Steve and I are going to talk about our beta strategies as we're heading into beta season. And otherwise, we'll see you next week.